Hello everyone, and a warm welcome back to the channel. Today we embark on an incredibly ambitious and profoundly significant intellectual voyage, delving into the unparalleled complexities, devastating impact, and transformative legacy of the Second World War. This global conflagration, a cataclysm that relentlessly unfolded from 1939 to 1945, irrevocably reshaped continents, fundamentally reconfigured the global geopolitical order, and etched an indelible, often agonizing imprint upon humanity's collective consciousness. It was a conflict of truly unprecedented scope and unimaginable brutality, drawing virtually every nation on Earth into its vortex, either directly engaged in ferocious combat or profoundly impacted by its vast and enduring consequences. The human toll was staggering, claiming the lives of an estimated 70 to 85 million individuals, including tens of millions of civilians, thereby solidifying its grim distinction as the deadliest conflict ever recorded, a haunting testament to its destructive power and the abyssal depths of human suffering it unleashed. In the course of this exhaustive exploration, we will meticulously dissect the intricate web of socio-political, economic, and ideological factors that precipitated its outbreak, carefully unraveling the underlying forces that propelled the world towards the precipice of total war. Our narrative will meticulously trace the dramatic ebb and flow of military campaigns across numerous and vastly disparate theaters of operations. From the desolate, frozen expanses of Eastern Europe, where a brutal war of extermination raged with unparalleled ferocity, to the searing hot deserts of North Africa, defined by an unrelenting conflict of maneuver, logistics, and endurance. From the boundless blue reaches of the Pacific Ocean, where the revolutionary projection of naval air power fundamentally redefined maritime combat, to the embattled skies above Great Britain, the crucible of Adolf Hitler's first major strategic reversal, and the treacherous submarine-infested waters of the Atlantic, where the desperate battle for control over vital supply lines became an imperative of survival for the British Isles. Beyond the purely military dimensions of the conflict, we shall meticulously examine the astonishing technological leaps that the war catalyzed, ranging from the pivotal development of radar and the harnessing of atomic energy to the advent of jet propulsion and the nascent beginnings of modern computing. Concurrently, we will confront the agonizing moral quandaries it thrust upon humanity, forcing an uncomfortable interrogation of the boundaries of cruelty and the remarkable depths of human resilience. Our journey will culminate in a comprehensive analysis of the war's profound and enduring repercussions, which continue to resonate across the globe and profoundly shape our contemporary world, influencing international relations, geopolitical alignments, and our fundamental understanding of global peace and security. This is not merely an arid recitation of dates and names. Rather, it represents a heartfelt and earnest endeavor to grasp the intricate interplay of forces and the complex personalities that propelled nations towards such extreme violence. It seeks to honor the extraordinary courage and immense sacrifice of countless individuals caught in its merciless maelstrom, and to illuminate the enduring, frequently painful lessons indelibly inscribed in the annals of time for the illumination of future generations. We will meticulously chart the historical trajectory from the fragile and disquieting peace that succeeded the First World War, a peace demonstrably sown with the seeds of discord and festering resentment, to the cataclysmic global conflagration that utterly consumed the planet. This involves dissecting the motivations of key state and non-state actors, scrutinizing the strategic decisions that irrevocably altered the course of human history, and acknowledging the immense human cost, borne by soldiers and civilians indiscriminately across every continent touched by its devastating shadow. Prepare yourselves for an immersive, comprehensive, and profoundly moving exploration of this monumental historical epic, delving deeply into its strategic nuances, its harrowing human tragedies, and its persistent, omnipresent legacy. Before we embark on this monumental historical discourse, I am eager to hear your thoughts. How is your day unfolding so far? Please share your reflections in the comments section below. While you're there, consider sharing a personal goal you're actively pursuing for the future. It could be an ambitious long-term aspiration or a modest, daily objective, but something that genuinely inspires you to strive for progress. Lastly, if you discern value in this extensive exploration and appreciate the considerable effort invested in creating content of this caliber, I implore you to consider clicking the subscribe button and becoming a part of our burgeoning community of dedicated history enthusiasts. Your support truly constitutes a profound difference and empowers me to persistently deliver these in-depth historical narratives, meticulously examining the pivotal events that have shaped the trajectory of our civilization. Now, let us direct our attention to the tumultuous and increasingly volatile period that immediately preceded the calamitous outbreak of the Second World War, an era characterized by a dangerous cocktail of simmering resentments, aggressive expansionist ambitions, harbored by revisionist powers, and a desperate, ultimately futile pursuit of diplomatic appeasement by the established democratic nations. The profound origins of this colossal conflict were sown decades earlier, within the immediate and often acrimonious aftermath of the First World War, significantly shaped by the punitive impositions of the Treaty of Versailles. This purportedly peacemaking agreement, formally signed in June 1919 within the opulent Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, was ostensibly conceived to forestall future hostilities by severely debilitating Germany's military and economic capabilities, thereby ensuring it could never again pose a credible threat to European stability. However, far from cultivating a lasting and equitable peace, it inadvertently fostered a pervasive sentiment of profound injustice and deep-seated resentment within the German populace. The newly formed German nation felt profoundly and unfairly burdened by the staggering reparations payments initially stipulated at an astronomical sum of 132 billion gold marks, which catastrophically ravaged its post-war economy, precipitating widespread destitution, rampant unemployment, and severe social unrest. Furthermore, it endured extensive territorial dismemberment, including the forced return of Alsace-Lorraine to France, significant portions of Prussia ceded to the newly independent Polish state, the controversial creation of the Polish Corridor, which geographically severed German territory and afforded Poland vital access to the Baltic Sea, and the mandated demilitarization of the Rhineland, which placed German industry under Allied oversight and severely curtailed its national sovereignty. To further intensify the pervasive sense of humiliation, the infamous War Guilt Clause, specifically Article 231 of the treaty, unequivocally placed sole moral responsibility for the initiation of the Great War directly upon Germany's shoulders, a deeply humiliating and widely resented accusation that extensively fueled revisionist sentiments and a fervent desire for vengeance across vast segments of the German population. The fragile Weimar Republic, Germany's nascent democratic government, established amid the post-war chaos of revolution and economic collapse, grappled immensely under the crushing weight of economic instability. This included the devastating hyperinflation of the early 1920s, which rendered currency utterly worthless and obliterated the savings of the middle class, and the subsequent global economic downturn of the Great Depression, which unleashed mass unemployment, pervasive societal despair, and widespread political radicalization. This highly volatile and desperate socio-economic environment created exceptionally fertile ground for the rapid proliferation of radical ideologies that offered compelling, albeit illusory, promises of national resurgence, economic recovery, and an emphatic end to the perceived humiliation of Versailles, presenting simplistic solutions to deeply complex and entrenched societal problems. Across the European continent, novel and profoundly perilous political philosophies were rapidly taking firm root, directly challenging the established liberals' democratic order that had emerged from the intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, and the optimistic, yet ultimately naive, spirit of the post-First World War era. In Italy, Benito Mussolini, a charismatic former socialist who had ardently embraced fervent nationalism and anti-liberalism, masterfully exploited the widespread post-war disillusionment, rampant social unrest, and severe economic hardships. He seized political power in October 1922 through the symbolically potent March on Rome, thereby establishing the world's first fascist state. This represented a novel and alarming form of totalitarianism, fundamentally characterized by the egoist, complete subjugation of the individual to the absolute authority of the state. The brutal suppression of all political opposition through widespread violence and intimidation perpetrated by his paramilitary blackshirts, a pervasive cult of personality meticulously constructed around Il Duce, and an aggressively expansionist foreign policy. The latter explicitly aimed to restore Italy's perceived historical glory and influence, envisioning a revived Roman Empire dominating the Mediterranean Sea, a concept he grandly termed Mare Nostrum, our sea. This ideological fervor directly fueled Italy's expansionist ambitions in North Africa and the Balkans, culminating most notably in the brutal invasion and subsequent conquest of Ethiopia between 1935 and 1936. This particularly vicious conflict witnessed the Italian military's employment of modern weaponry, including chemical agents such as mustard gas, against a largely ill-equipped African nation, representing a blatant and egregious violation of international law. This act starkly exposed the inherent weakness and profound moral bankruptcy of the League of Nations, which responded with largely ineffective sanctions that were widely disregarded by the major global powers, further eroding the League's credibility and starkly demonstrating its fundamental incapacity to enforce collective security in the face of overt aggression. Meanwhile, in Germany, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, universally recognized as the Nazi Party, under the spellbinding leadership of the demagogic and fanatical Adolf Hitler, expertly exploited public discontent, widespread unemployment, and surging nationalist fervor, promising a return to national greatness and a reversal of fortunes. Hitler vowed to restore national pride, achieve economic prosperity through massive public works projects and extensive rearmament, and rebuild Germany's military strength, explicitly swearing to overturn the hated dictates of Versailles and reassert Germany's dominance on the European stage. His ascent to the chancellorship in January 1933, initially achieved through ostensibly legal means, but rapidly consolidating absolute power through a calculated campaign of intimidation, violence, and shrewd legislative manipulation, exemplified by the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act, which effectively granted him dictatorial powers, marked a terrifying and utterly irreversible turning point for Germany and indeed for the entire continent of Europe. Hitler immediately commenced the systematic dismantling of democratic institutions, dissolving all opposition political parties, ruthlessly eliminating political opponents through purges such as the Night of the Long Knives, establishing the first concentration camp at Dachau specifically for political prisoners, and initiating Gleichschaltung, the forced Nazification of every conceivable aspect of German society, from education to media, ensuring total ideological control. Most alarmingly, he embarked on a clandestine but remarkably rapid rearmament program, in direct and flagrant defiance of the Treaty of Versailles' military restrictions regarding army size, naval tonnage, and the outright prohibition of an air's force. His chilling ideology meticulously articulated in his autobiographical manifesto, Mein Kampf, presented a terrifying blueprint for racial purity, aggressive territorial expansion aimed at achieving Lebensraum, or living space in the Gauss East at the merciless expense of Slavic peoples, whom he intended to enslave or utterly exterminate, and the systematic persecution and eventual mass extermination of perceived enemies, particularly the Jewish population, whom he demonized as scapegoats for all of Germany's ills and portrayed as an existential threat to the purity of the Aryan race. The initial economic recovery observed under Nazi rule, largely achieved through monumental public works projects like the Autobahns and the rapidly burgeoning rearmament industry, financed by deficit spending and later by the systematic looting of conquered territories and plundered wealth, further cemented popular support for the regime among many Germans, often masking its darker, genocidal intentions for a significant portion of the populace and for foreign observers who were frequently more preoccupied with economic revival than with human rights abuses. Concurrently, in East Asia, another powerful and increasingly militaristic nation was embarking on a fiercely aggressive expansionist trajectory, driven by a complex interplay of factors. These included a desperate perceived need for natural resources to fuel its industrial growth, a rapidly burgeoning population seeking new territories for colonization, and a deeply ingrained conviction in its own racial and cultural superiority, powerfully epitomized by the concept of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which effectively masked thinly veiled imperialistic ambitions for regional hegemony and the expulsion of Western colonial influence. Imperial Japan, under the ever-increasing sway of its ultranationalist military factions, began asserting its dominance throughout the region, viewing itself as Asia's legitimate leader, destined to liberate it from the perceived oppression of Western colonial powers. In September 1931, Japan initiated a brutal invasion of Manchuria, a resource-rich region located in northeastern China, following the staged Mukden incident, a fabricated railway explosion ingeniously used as a pretext. For the invasion by the Kwantung Army, Japan's elite and well-trained force stationed in the region. They swiftly established the puppet state of Manchukuo, installing a compliant government under the former Qing Emperor Puyi. The League of Nations, the international body painstakingly created after World War I, with the laudable objective of maintaining global peace through collective security, proved utterly impotent in deterring this blatant act of aggression. Its abject inability to enforce its own resolutions, as powerfully evidenced by the ineffective Lytton Report, which condemned Japan's actions and Japan's subsequent defiant withdrawal from the League, or to impose any meaningful sanctions, underscored its inherent structural weaknesses and ominously foreshadowed its eventual irrelevance in preventing a larger, more widespread global conflict. Japan's militarist government persisted in its relentless incursions into mainland China, steadily escalating tensions and culminating in the full-scale Sino-Japanese War in July 1937, following the Marco Polo Bridge incident near Beijing, a minor skirmish that rapidly escalated into an all-out war. This brutal conflict, characterized by immense Chinese suffering, widespread destruction, and horrific Japanese atrocities, such as the infamous Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were systematically murdered, and women, subjected to widespread sexual violence, and the horrifying human experimentation conducted by Unit 731, would endure for 8 protracted years, predating and eventually merging seamlessly with the broader Second World War, thus serving as a bitter and bloody prologue to the global conflict. Back in Europe, Hitler systematically and shrewdly tested the resolve of the Western democracies, continually pushing the boundaries of international law and treaty obligations with a series of audacious and meticulously calculated maneuvers, each consistently met with insufficient resistance, which only served to reinforce his profound contempt for their perceived weakness. In March 1936, he boldly issued orders for the remilitarization of the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone strategically located along Germany's western border, a clear and unequivocal violation of both the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno, treaties which explicitly guaranteed the inviolability of the Franco-German border. France, despite possessing a numerically superior army at the time, found itself politically paralyzed and lacked the requisite British support for decisive military action. Meanwhile, Great Britain viewed the Rhineland as Germany's backyard and perceived no immediate existential threat to its own security. Consequently, neither nation offered significant military resistance, clinging instead to a deeply flawed and ultimately disastrous policy of appeasement. This approach, championed most notably by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, was rooted in the misguided conviction that satisfying Hitler's ostensibly reasonable demands and addressing perceived German grievances would effectively avert a larger, more destructive war, thereby satiating his expansionist appetite. This strategy, however, only served to embolden Hitler further, solidifying his conviction that the Western powers demonstrably lacked the political will and moral courage to effectively confront his aggression, interpreting their inaction as a clear sign of weakness and an implicit invitation for further demands. The following year, Germany meticulously solidified its alliances, forging the anti-Comintern Pact with Japan, ostensibly directed against international communism, to which Italy later acceded, thereby laying the crucial foundations for the formidable Axis powers, a coalition of expansionist, authoritarian states united by anti-democratic and anti-communist ideologies and a shared, fervent desire to overturn the post-World War I international order, which they vehemently regarded as unjust and inherently unsustainable. The year 1938 witnessed further aggressive and calculated moves that drew Europe inexorably closer to the precipice of a full-scale war. In March, Germany orchestrated the annexation of Austria in the Anschluss, a bloodless but forceful takeover achieved through a combination of intense intimidation, shrewd political maneuvering, and a degree of popular support among some Austrians, who genuinely desired union with Germany, yet an undeniable and flagrant violation of the Treaty of Versailles' explicit prohibition of Austro-German unification. This audacious act was met with little more than perfunctory diplomatic protests and a palpable sense of resigned helplessness from the international community, further underscoring the glaring ineffectiveness of collective security and the inherent limitations of the League of Nations. Hitler then swiftly turned his attention towards Czechoslovakia, a vibrant democratic nation, possessing a robust army, considerable strategic importance, valuable industrial capacity, and formidable defensive fortifications meticulously constructed along its border with Germany. He vehemently demanded the Sudetenland, a border region containing a significant German-speaking population, baselessly alleging persecution of ethnic Germans and skillfully agitating nationalist sentiment, threatening outright war if his demands were not immediately met. The infamous Munich Agreement, signed in September 1938 by Germany, Italy, France, and Great Britain, infamously ceded the Sudetenland to Germany in exchange for Hitler's solemn yet utterly hollow promise of no further territorial demands and a commitment to maintaining peace. Chamberlain, upon his return to Britain, famously declared, "Peace for our time," a pronouncement that would tragically and swiftly become a poignant epitaph for the entire era of appeasement, a stark symbol of its profound and ultimately fatal failure. The profound betrayal of Czechoslovakia, a loyal democratic ally that was effectively dismembered without its consent or any participation whatsoever in the negotiations, served as a sharp and disheartening demonstration of the West's profound reluctance to confront aggression, unequivocally prioritizing short-term peace over long-term security and fundamental moral principles. In a mere 6 months, by March 1939, Hitler brazenly violated the Munich Agreement, occupying the remainder of Czechoslovakia and establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, making it unequivocally clear that his territorial ambitions extended far beyond the mere unification of German-speaking peoples, and that his promises were utterly worthless. This calculated act finally shattered the illusion of appeasement for numerous Western leaders, particularly in Britain and France, who now grasped that direct confrontation was not only inevitable, but imminently approaching. During this tumultuous pre-war period, the Spanish Civil War, which convulsed the Iberian Peninsula from 1936 to 1939, served as a brutal dress rehearsal for the far larger global conflict yet to come, affording crucial combat experience and providing invaluable testing, grounds for new military doctrines and emergent technologies. The nationalist forces, under the command of General Francisco Franco, received substantial and unequivocal military and material support from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, including the deployment of the German Condor Legion and Italian Volunteer Corps. These forces fiercely battled against the Republican government, which in turn received limited assistance from the Soviet Union and thousands of international volunteers, including the renowned Abraham Lincoln Brigade from the United States. This proxy conflict allowed Germany and Italy to meticulously test novel military technologies and refine tactical approaches, including demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of aerial bombing against civilian populations, as tragically evinced in Guernica by the German Condor Legion, and the coordinated application of tanks and aircraft in sophisticated combined arms operations, thereby refining their nascent blitzkrieg tactics. It also furnished invaluable combat experience for their respective armed forces and enabled them to perfect their blitzkrieg strategies while simultaneously exposing the deep-seated ideological fissures across Europe between fascism, communism, and democracy, divisions that would soon erupt on a global scale. The world observed, largely paralyzed by internal divisions, a widespread desire to avoid direct military involvement and a dangerous miscalculation regarding the true existential nature of the fascist threat, as fascism inexorably gained ground and chillingly demonstrated its destructive potential and ruthless operational efficiency. With Czechoslovakia now fully absorbed and the Western powers seemingly unwilling to act decisively until the 11th hour, Hitler's covetous gaze inexorably shifted eastward towards Poland. He swiftly resurrected long-standing demands for the return of Danzig, a free city with a predominantly German population and extraterritorial access across the Polish corridor, a geographically vital strip of land separating East Prussia from the remainder of Germany, which provided Poland crucial access to the Baltic Sea. Poland fiercely defended this corridor as absolutely essential to its national sovereignty and economic viability. Great Britain and France, at last comprehending the utter futility and inherent danger of continued appeasement, issued firm and unambiguous guarantees of Polish independence, unequivocally signaling that any further aggression would be met with decisive military force. However, in a shocking and cynically calculated diplomatic maneuver that reverberated globally and irrevocably reshaped the geopolitical landscape, Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty with the Soviet Union in August 1939. This pact, publicly presented as a diplomatic breakthrough purportedly guaranteeing peace, contained highly secret protocols that chillingly outlined the brutal division of Poland and other Eastern European territories into predefined German and Soviet spheres of influence, thereby effectively eliminating the immediate threat of a two-front war for Germany and clearing the path for the imminent invasion of Poland. On September 1, 1939, German forces, employing a revolutionary and devastating military strategy known as blitzkrieg, or lightning war, surged across the Polish frontier. This groundbreaking doctrine emphatically prioritized unprecedented speed, overwhelming surprise, and crushing concentrated force, meticulously coordinating highly mobile panzer divisions, motorized infantry, and close air support from the Luftwaffe. To effect rapid breakthroughs of enemy lines, skillfully bypass strongpoints, and swiftly encircle opposing armies, thereby preventing them from forming cohesive defensive formations. The Polish army, largely reliant on horse cavalry and antiquated equipment, was swiftly overwhelmed by the sheer pace, ferocity, and undeniable technological superiority of the German assault, despite pockets of heroic and determined resistance. Within mere weeks, the Polish armed forces were utterly shattered, and on September 17th, the Soviet Union, adhering to the clandestine terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, invaded Poland from the east, completing its brutal partition. Poland ceased to exist as an independent sovereign nation, its territory brutally divided between two totalitarian powers. Thousands of Polish officers and intellectuals were later systematically murdered by the Soviets in the infamous Katyn massacre, a grim and enduring testament to the brutality of the occupation. Great Britain and France, honoring their solemn commitments to Poland, issued final ultimatums to Germany, demanding its immediate withdrawal. When these demands were contemptuously ignored on September 3, 1939, they formally declared war on Germany. The Second World War had officially begun, plunging Europe into another catastrophic conflict, the immense scale of which would soon dwarf all previous wars in human history. The world watched in stunned horror, but the sheer speed and chilling efficiency of the German war machine left little time for effective international intervention. Following the swift and decisive conquest of Poland, a peculiar and profoundly unsettling period, colloquially known as the Phony War, or Sitzkrieg, settled over Western Europe. For 8 protracted months, from the autumn of 1939 through the spring of 1940, there was remarkably little direct military engagement on the Western Front, despite the formal declaration of war. British and French forces methodically mobilized along the formidable Maginot Line, an intricate chain of concrete fortifications meticulously designed to deter invasion, while German forces consolidated their recent gains in the east. This apparent lull, however, was merely the deceptive calm, preceding an even greater storm. Both belligerent sides utilized this interlude for extensive rearmament and intricate strategic planning, but the Allies largely remained on the defensive, hoping to avoid direct confrontation and perhaps to economically choke Germany through a prolonged naval blockade. This strategic inaction, compounded by a misguided belief in the impregnability of the Maginot Line and the guaranteed neutrality of Belgium, proved to be a fatal miscalculation, as Germany astutely exploited the time to meticulously prepare its next decisive moves with chilling precision. In April 1940, Hitler abruptly shattered the deceptive quietude, launching his next audacious offensive with the swift invasion of Denmark and Norway. Denmark, a small and largely undefended nation, capitulated almost immediately, offering only minimal resistance. Norway, however, aided by British and French expeditionary forces, mounted a fierce and determined resistance in a series of naval and land engagements, including the pivotal battles of Narvik, where British naval forces inflicted significant losses on the German Navy, particularly among its destroyer fleet. Despite Allied efforts and initial tactical successes, the Germans ultimately secured full control of Norway by early June, gaining crucial naval bases strategically positioned along the Atlantic coast. These bases would prove invaluable for U-boat operations targeting Allied shipping and ensured vital access to iron ore supplies from neutral Sweden, essential for Germany's burgeoning war industry. This northern campaign starkly demonstrated Germany's burgeoning capability to project power across the sea and ominously highlighted the vulnerabilities inherent in the Allied defensive posture, serving as a chilling prelude to the impending offensive in the West. The true strategic shockwave that would fundamentally redefine the course of the war struck with devastating force on May 10, 1940, when Germany launched its full-scale invasion of France and the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Instead of a frontal assault on the heavily fortified Maginot Line, for which the Allies had painstakingly prepared and meticulously anticipated, the Germans executed a daring and brilliantly conceived flanking maneuver. Their primary armored force, spearheaded by powerful panzer divisions under the command of brilliant tactical generals like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel, was astonishingly routed through the seemingly impassable Ardennes forest, a densely wooded and hilly region previously dismissed by Allied planners as unsuitable for large-scale tank movements. This audacious and entirely unexpected move, a crucial component of the Manstein Plan, caught the Allied forces, particularly the French and British armies, completely off guard. The blitzkrieg tore through Belgium and northern France with terrifying speed, rapidly outflanking the main Allied armies, which had unwisely advanced into Belgium to confront what they erroneously believed to be the principal German attack. The sheer velocity of the German advance was astounding, creating widespread panic, pervasive disorganization, and a rapid catastrophic collapse of Allied defensive lines, as communications fragmented and entire units were bypassed and mercilessly cut off, leading to a swift and utterly decisive victory for the Wehrmacht. Within mere weeks, a vast contingent of British, French, and Belgian troops found themselves perilously encircled and trapped against the English Channel at Dunkirk, their backs literally to the sea, facing imminent annihilation. What transpired next was one of the most remarkable and desperate evacuations in the annals of military history. From May 26 to June 4, 1940, under relentless aerial bombardment from the Luftwaffe and incessant German ground pressure, an astonishing total of over 338,000 Allied soldiers were miraculously transported across the Channel to relative safety in Great Britain. This miracle of Dunkirk was achieved through an extraordinary, all-encompassing effort involving every conceivable available vessel, ranging from naval destroyers and professional troop transports to hundreds of intrepid civilian fishing boats, yachts, and pleasure craft, all bravely defying enemy fire and treacherous waters, valiantly protected by the Royal Air Force, RAF, which fought ferociously to maintain vital air superiority over the embattled beaches, while serving as an undeniable testament to incredible courage, ingenious improvisation, and the indomitable resilience of the human spirit. It also stood as a stark symbol of the catastrophic defeat inflicted upon the Allied armies on the continent, leaving France utterly vulnerable. France, with its armies shattered and its government in utter disarray, signed a humiliating armistice with Germany on June 22, 1940, notably in the very same railway carriage where Germany had signed the armistice, bringing an end to World War I, a profoundly symbolic act of retribution for Hitler. Northern France and the entire Atlantic coast were subsequently placed under direct German occupation, while a collaborationist regime, Vichy France, was established in the south, nominally independent but effectively subservient to Berlin, led by the aging Marshal Philippe Pétain. Great Britain now stood completely isolated, confronting the full and terrifying might of the Nazi war machine, with the immediate existential threat of invasion looming large and seemingly inevitable. Hitler's strategic focus then turned directly towards Great Britain, meticulously planning Operation Sea Lion, an ambitious and complex amphibious invasion across the English Channel. However, a prerequisite for this grand undertaking was the achievement of decisive air superiority over the Royal Air Force, RAF, essential to protect his invasion fleet and ground troops from devastating aerial attacks. Thus commenced the Battle of Britain, a prolonged and brutally fought aerial campaign conducted primarily over the skies of southern England from July to October 1940. The Luftwaffe, Germany's powerful air force, launched massive bombing raids against critical British airfields, vital chain-home radar stations, and essential aircraft factories, with the express objective of paralyzing the RAF's capacity to defend the island. The battle unfolded in several distinct and intense phases, initially targeting shipping in the Channel, then shifting to direct assaults on RAF airfields and infrastructure, and finally, in a crucial strategic miscalculation by Hitler, pivoting to direct attacks on British cities, particularly London, in retaliation for a relatively minor British air raid on Berlin. This pivotal shift from military targets to civilian centers inadvertently allowed the severely strained RAF to recover, regroup, and repair, ultimately proving decisive. The RAF, though significantly outnumbered in both aircraft and experienced pilots, particularly during the initial stages of the battle, fought with incredible determination, effectively utilizing superior tactical doctrines, the newly developed and highly effective radar technology that provided crucial early warning of incoming raids, and the unparalleled courage and skill of its multinational pilots, many of whom hailed from Commonwealth nations and occupied European countries, fighting not only for Britain's survival, but for the very essence of freedom and the continuation of democracy. The battle itself was an exceptionally grueling test of national endurance, with both sides suffering heavy losses in aircraft and highly trained personnel. Ultimately, the RAF, despite immense pressure and relentless daily combat, inflicted unacceptable losses on the Luftwaffe, compelling Hitler to indefinitely postpone his invasion plans. This represented a crucial and undeniable turning point in the war, marking the first major strategic defeat for Nazi Germany, and unequivocally demonstrating that the Blitzkrieg was not an invincible doctrine, and that Great Britain could not be easily subjugated by air power alone. Frustrated by his demonstrable inability to shatter British air defenses and launch a successful cross-channel invasion, Hitler shifted his tactical approach, initiating the Blitz, a sustained and devastating campaign of nocturnal aerial bombardment targeting British cities, most notably London, from September 1940 to May 1941. The overarching aim was to break the morale of the British populace, severely disrupt industrial production, and ultimately force Great Britain to sue for peace. Night after relentless night, German bombers rained down destruction, causing widespread devastation, demolishing homes and critical infrastructure, and inflicting countless civilian casualties. However, the British population endured with remarkable resilience and stoicism, displaying a defiant spirit that rapidly became a powerful symbol of their national character and unwavering determination. Underground shelters became temporary refuges, and the defiant resolve of Londoners became legendary as they bravely sifted through the rubble each morning and stoically continued their daily lives, unequivocally demonstrating that aerial bombardment alone could not shatter a nation's collective will. The steadfast resilience of the British people became a profound source of inspiration for the free world and a compelling testament to civilian fortitude under fire, proving that their spirit could not be broken. While the Battle of Britain raged in the skies over England, the war significantly expanded to North Africa, a theater of vital strategic importance due to its crucial proximity to the Suez Canal, a pivotal shipping lane linking the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean and the oil-rich Middle East. Italy, driven by a fervent desire to expand its colonial empire and assert its dominance in the Mediterranean, launched an invasion of British-controlled Egypt from its colony of Libya in September 1940. However, the Italian forces proved largely ineffective and chronically ill-equipped, suffering from pervasive low morale and demonstrably inadequate leadership. A swift and brilliantly executed British counteroffensive, dubbed Operation Compass, decisively pushed them back deep into the Libyan interior, capturing an immense number of Italian prisoners and substantial quantities of equipment, thereby threatening the complete collapse of the Italian position in North Africa. Germany, recognizing the critical strategic importance of the region and the urgent necessity of supporting its struggling ally, dispatched the famed Afrika Korps under the command of the brilliant and audacious General Erwin Rommel, widely known as the Desert Fox, in February 1941. Rommel's arrival injected new dynamism and unparalleled tactical brilliance into the Axis efforts, and the Desert War rapidly devolved into a relentless back-and-forth struggle characterized by rapid advances and equally swift retreats across vast, desolate, and incredibly challenging landscapes. Control of key supply ports and vital oases constantly shifted hands in a fluid and dynamic battlefield, epitomizing a protracted battle of logistics, daring maneuver, and sheer endurance under extreme conditions, often fought across hundreds of miles of open desert. Combat predominantly involved tanks, artillery, and infantry, with both sides continually adapting to the harsh environment and developing specialized tactics for desert warfare. The Balkans also quickly transformed into a new and critically important front. The ill-fated and poorly conceived Italian invasion of Greece in October 1940 rapidly bogged down in the formidable mountainous terrain and harsh winter conditions, suffering heavy losses and necessitating urgent German intervention to avert a complete collapse of their ally and to secure the vulnerable Axis southern flank, which was susceptible to Allied air attacks launched from Greece and the formidable presence of British naval power in the Mediterranean. In April 1941, Germany launched a rapid and brutal invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece, swiftly crushing their defenses with overwhelming force and perfectly coordinated combined arms attacks. Yugoslavia was quickly dismembered, and Greece was overrun despite fierce and determined resistance from Greek and British Commonwealth forces. This successful Balkan campaign, while achieving its immediate military objectives and effectively securing the Axis southern flank, crucially delayed the meticulously planned invasion of the Soviet Union by several absolutely critical weeks. A delay that would have profound and ultimately catastrophic consequences for the German war effort as the brutal Russian winter relentlessly approached, leaving significantly less time for a decisive victory before the onset of the cold season. This unforeseen diversion of vital resources and precious time proved to be a significant strategic blunder by Hitler, as the invasion of Russia was pushed back, leading eventually to the German army being caught utterly unprepared by the unforgiving Russian winter, the most monumental and utterly devastating phase of the war, a conflict of unparalleled scale and unforgiving brutality, commenced on June 22, 1941, when Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive ideological invasion of the Soviet Union. This was, for Hitler, the ultimate ideological struggle, a virulent crusade against Bolshevism and a brutal war of extermination directed against the Slavic peoples, whom he contemptuously viewed as racially inferior and destined for enslavement or outright annihilation to make way for German settlers, and the Jewish population of Eastern Europe, whom he systematically aimed to exterminate as part of his chilling genocidal plan, the final solution. It constituted the largest land invasion in recorded history, involving millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and immense air support, stretching across a colossal front thousands of kilometers long, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The Soviets, despite numerous intelligence warnings from diverse sources, including their own espionage network and British intelligence, were largely caught by surprise, their forces often poorly positioned, lacking modern equipment, and severely weakened by Stalin's brutal purges of their experienced officer corps in the late 1930s, which had decimated seasoned leadership. The initial German advance was astonishingly successful, employing blitzkrieg tactics on an unprecedented scale across the vast plains of the Soviet Union. Three enormous German army groups, Army Group North targeting Leningrad, Army Group Center aiming for Moscow, and Army Group South pushing towards Ukraine and the strategically vital Caucasian oil fields, advanced deep into Soviet territory, encircling vast numbers of Soviet troops in gargantuan pockets, capturing immense areas of land, and inflicting staggering casualties. Millions of prisoners were taken, often treated with extreme brutality, many perishing in captivity from starvation, exposure, or deliberate execution. The Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, followed closely behind the advancing armies, systematically murdering Jews and other perceived enemies, initiating the horrific Holocaust by bullet, and establishing a reign of terror. However, the sheer geographical expanse of the Soviet Union, the immense distances involved, the notoriously underdeveloped infrastructure, and the inherently brutal nature of the Eastern Front presented unique and ultimately insurmountable challenges for the meticulously crafted German war machine. The Soviets, under the iron-fisted rule of Joseph Stalin, adopted a ruthless, scorched earth policy, destroying everything that could potentially be useful to the advancing Germans, thereby denying them crucial resources and vital shelter. Furthermore, they miraculously evacuated entire industrial factories eastward, beyond the Ural Mountains, where they could continue vital war production, displacing millions of workers and indispensable machinery, demonstrating an incredible and unanticipated capacity for industrial mobilization. The Red Army, despite its initial disorganization and immense devastating losses, began to mount a fierce and increasingly effective resistance, fueled by desperate patriotism and an unwavering desire to defend their homeland. The Soviet population, mobilized for total war, sacrificed everything imaginable for the war effort, enduring unimaginable suffering and hardship. As the German armies advanced ever deeper, their already tenuous supply lines became dangerously overstretched, extending thousands of kilometers back to Germany, rendering resupply and reinforcement incredibly difficult and highly vulnerable to increasingly effective partisan attacks behind German lines. Moreover, the brutal Russian winter, which arrived early and with unprecedented intensity, began to exact its devastating toll. German troops, woefully ill-equipped for the extreme cold, suffered terribly from frostbite, hypothermia, and widespread mechanical failures, as lubricants froze and engines seized, rendering their advanced equipment useless. The agonizing siege of Leningrad commenced in September 1941, a horrific blockade that would endure for an unbearable 900 days, claiming over 1 million civilian lives through starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment. Yet the city steadfastly refused to capitulate, demonstrating incredible resilience sustained by the precarious road of life across the frozen Lake Ladoga. The German advance on Moscow, the symbolic Soviet capital, reached its closest point in December 1941, with advanced German units reportedly sighting the city's spires. But a ferocious Soviet counteroffensive, spearheaded by fresh Siberian divisions, shrewdly transferred from the Far East after intelligence confirmed that Japan would not attack, coupled with the brutal onset of winter, decisively pushed the Germans back from the city's very gates. Operation Barbarossa fundamentally failed to achieve its primary objective of a swift, decisive victory and the collapse of the Soviet Union, marking a critical and utterly irreversible turning point on the Eastern Front. It irrevocably condemned Germany to a prolonged war of attrition for which it was woefully unprepared, and forced Hitler to fight a two-front war, a nightmare scenario he had desperately sought to avoid since the days of World War I, ultimately sealing his catastrophic fate. Meanwhile, across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States, while officially maintaining neutrality and deeply committed to an isolationist foreign policy, had been increasingly providing vital and indispensable aid to the Allied powers, particularly to Great Britain, which desperately required supplies to sustain its arduous struggle against Nazi Germany. The Lend-Lease Act, a landmark piece of legislation passed in March 1941, empowered the U.S. to furnish war material, ranging from tanks and aircraft to foodstuffs, fuel, and critical raw materials, to Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and other Allied nations, effectively transforming America into the arsenal of democracy without formally entering the escalating conflict. This vital assistance played an absolutely crucial role in sustaining the Allied war effort, especially for Great Britain, which was under constant existential threat of invasion and economic collapse, and for the Soviet Union, which was bearing the overwhelming brunt of the German invasion. In August 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill secretly convened off the coast of Newfoundland, issuing the Atlantic Charter, a joint declaration that boldly outlined their shared vision for the post-war world order. It emphatically emphasized principles such as self-determination, free trade, freedom from want and fear, and broad international cooperation, thereby laying the crucial intellectual and moral groundwork for the future United Nations and the EEEE post-war international framework based on liberal democratic values even before the U.S. formally entered the war. This pivotal document articulated a moral vision for the ongoing conflict and a profound commitment to a new global framework, fostering a burgeoning sense of shared purpose among the future Allied powers. The truly global nature of the conflict dramatically intensified on December 7, 1941, when Imperial Japan launched a devastating and meticulously planned surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This carefully executed air raid, carried out by hundreds of Japanese carrier-based aircraft, effectively crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet, sinking or severely damaging numerous battleships, and tragically killing thousands of American servicemen. The attack's strategic intent was to neutralize the U.S. fleet for a period of several months, thereby granting Japan unimpeded freedom to rapidly expand its empire across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, seizing vital resource-rich territories without immediate American interference. However, it inadvertently produced the opposite and entirely unintended effect. The very next day, December 8th, the United States, united in profound outrage and a fierce desire for retribution, formally declared war on Japan, thereby unequivocally entering the Second World War. Germany and Italy, honoring their alliance with Japan under the Tripartite Pact, declared war on the United States shortly thereafter, transforming the conflict into a truly global war of unprecedented scale, encompassing virtually all major world powers and spanning multiple continents and vast oceans, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the tropical islands of the Pacific, from the scorching deserts of North Africa to the embattled skies over Great Britain, and across the vast, vital shipping lanes of the Atlantic. The entire world was now fully engulfed in total war, with battle lines irrevocably drawn across the entire globe. The initial months of 1942 witnessed a period of rapid and terrifying Japanese expansion across the vast Pacific and Southeast Asian regions. Following the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched simultaneous and meticulously coordinated assaults across an immense area, swiftly overwhelming unprepared and often poorly equipped Allied defenses. They rapidly conquered the Philippines, where American and Filipino forces endured the brutal Bataan death march following their surrender, Malaya, the supposedly impregnable fortress of Singapore, Burma, and the resource-rich Dutch East Indies, thereby acquiring vast territories teeming with vital resources such as oil, rubber, and tin, all crucial for their burgeoning war machine and their aspirations for regional dominance. The sheer speed and chilling efficiency of these conquests were astonishing, shattering the prevailing myth of Western invincibility and rapidly forging a new and formidable Japanese empire. The ignominious fall of Singapore in February 1942, a British bastion widely regarded as a pillar of Allied power in Asia, constituted a particularly humiliating and profoundly demoralizing defeat for the Allies, starkly demonstrating the swiftness of Japan's military might and the palpable lack of preparedness among the colonial powers. Thousands of Allied troops were taken prisoner, many enduring horrific conditions in Japanese prisoner-of-war camps, where starvation, rampant disease, and forced labor were endemic, often in flagrant violation of international conventions, leading to immense suffering and widespread death. In April 1942, the United States executed the Doolittle Raid, a daring and audaciously conceived bombing mission targeting Tokyo and other Japanese cities, utilizing B-25 bombers ingeniously launched from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, a feat previously considered impossible given the bomber's size and limited range. While causing limited material damage, the raid generated an immense psychological impact, significantly boosting American morale at a critical juncture and powerfully demonstrating that Japan itself was vulnerable to attack, thereby directly countering popular belief and official Japanese propaganda that asserted the homeland was inviolable. It also compelled Japan to further expand its defensive perimeter, thereby diverting valuable naval assets and inadvertently setting the stage for crucial and decisive naval engagements in the Pacific, as they desperately sought to eliminate the threat of future attacks and protect their newly acquired empire. The tide in the Pacific began to turn decisively with two pivotal naval battles, both fought predominantly by aircraft carriers, signaling a new and revolutionary era of naval warfare where carrier air power definitively supplanted battleships as the dominant force. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 was historically significant as the first naval battle where opposing ships never sighted each other, with all combat exclusively conducted by aircraft launched from distant aircraft carriers. While a tactical draw in terms of ship losses, it represented a crucial strategic victory for the Allies as it successfully thwarted a planned Japanese invasion of Port Moresby, New Guinea, which would have posed a direct and immediate threat to Australia. Crucially, it also damaged two Japanese carriers, thereby preventing their participation in the subsequent and even more vital engagement. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, proved to be the decisive and unquestionable turning point in the Pacific theater. The U.S. Navy, having brilliantly broken Japanese naval codes through superior signals intelligence, dubbed MAGIC, was able to precisely anticipate the Japanese attack on Midway Atoll, meticulously setting a trap. In a stunning and overwhelmingly decisive victory, American carrier aircraft sank four formidable Japanese aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, effectively crippling Japan's naval air power, irrevocably eliminating its carrier offensive force, and thereby ending its capacity to launch major offensive operations across the Pacific. From this point forward, Japan was largely compelled to remain on the defensive, its strategic initiative irrevocably lost, and the long, arduous road to Tokyo commenced, paving the way for the sustained American strategic counteroffensive. The first major U.S. land offensive in the Pacific commenced in August 1942 with the invasion of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. This proved to be a brutal, protracted 6-month campaign fought in the dense malarial jungle, characterized by ferocious close-quarters combat, relentless and fanatical Japanese resistance, and horrific environmental conditions, including widespread disease, starvation, and extreme heat and suffocating humidity. Both sides sustained heavy casualties, but the Allied victory secured a vitally important airfield, Henderson Field, and signaled the initiation of the island hopping or leapfrogging strategy, a methodical and inherently costly advance across the Pacific, involving the capture of key islands to establish essential airfields and naval bases, while strategically bypassing heavily fortified Japanese strongholds that pose no direct threat, thereby conserving precious resources and significantly accelerating the advance towards the Japanese home islands. This strategic approach was meticulously designed to isolate and neutralize Japanese garrisons without incurring unnecessary casualties, allowing the Allies to concentrate their efforts on strategically important targets, opening the way for future offensives and gradually strangling Japan's vital supply lines. On the Eastern Front, the year 1942 was profoundly dominated by the titanic and utterly devastating struggle for Stalingrad. After failing to capture Moscow in 1941, Hitler decisively shifted his strategic focus southward, aiming to seize the oil-rich Caucasus region, a critical necessity for the German war machine, and the industrial city of Stalingrad on the Volga. River, a symbolically important city named after Stalin, and a crucial transportation hub for Soviet supplies. The Battle of Stalingrad, which raged relentlessly from August 1942 to February 1943, stands as the bloodiest battle in human history, characterized by brutal urban warfare, relentless house-to-house fighting amidst the shattered ruins, and unimaginable suffering for both soldiers and civilians caught in the inferno. The German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, became inextricably bogged down in the city's ruins, facing fanatical Soviet resistance and fiercely fighting for every inch of ground in what became grimly known as Rattenkrieg, or Rat War, a stark testament to the ferocity of the close-quarters combat. In November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a massive and brilliantly executed pincer movement that effectively encircled the entire German Sixth Army, along with elements of Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian forces, trapping them inside Stalingrad. Hitler, gripped by a delusional refusal to permit a strategic retreat, stubbornly ordered Paulus to fight to the last man, promising an air resupply that never adequately materialized, thereby condemning his army to utter destruction. Cut off from all supplies and reinforcements, freezing, starving, and decimated by constant Soviet attacks, the German forces were systematically annihilated. The surrender of the Sixth Army in February 1943, with over 91,000 German soldiers taken prisoner from an initial force exceeding 300,000, represented a catastrophic and irreparable defeat for Germany, unequivocally marking the definitive and irreversible turning point on the Eastern Front. From this moment onward, strategic initiative passed decisively to the Soviets, and the German army was largely forced into a continuous, though often fierce and bloody retreat across vast distances, never fully recovering its offensive capability and gradually exhausting its precious manpower reserves. The summer of 1943 witnessed another colossal confrontation on the Eastern Front, the titanic Battle of Kursk. This represented Germany's last major strategic offensive on the Eastern Front, a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to regain the initiative by encircling a large Soviet salient, or bulge, in the fluid front lines. The battle involved the largest tank confrontation in recorded history, with thousands of tanks, including Germany's formidable new Panther and Tiger tanks, clashing across a vast open landscape. The Soviets, having meticulously anticipated the German attack through superior intelligence and having constructed extensive, multi-layered defensive lines in depth, complete with anti-tank ditches, vast minefields, and concealed artillery positions, skillfully absorbed the initial German thrust and then launched powerful counteroffensives. The German offensive, codenamed Operation Citadel, demonstrably failed to achieve its objectives, suffering heavy losses in armored vehicles and manpower, and definitively proving that the strategic initiative now firmly belonged to the Red Army. The Red Army, now increasingly confident, remarkably well-equipped, and tactically proficient, launched a series of powerful counterattacks that pushed the Germans even further back, liberating vast territories and demonstrating the burgeoning strength, tactical sophistication, and overwhelming numerical superiority of the Soviet war machine, which was now fully capable of executing large-scale offensive operations across immense distances. In North Africa, the tide had also decisively turned in favor of the Allies. Following their decisive victory at the Second Battle of El Alamein in October-November 1942, where General Bernard Montgomery's British Eighth Army inflicted a crushing defeat upon Rommel's Afrika Korps, the Axis forces were in a full and desperate retreat across Libya, relentlessly pursued. Simultaneously, in November 1942, the Western Allies launched Operation Torch, a massive amphibious landing of American and British forces in French North Africa, Morocco, and Algeria, initially encountering some resistance from Vichy French forces before ultimately securing their cooperation. This two-pronged offensive, advancing from both east and west, tightened the noose around the Axis forces, trapping them in Tunisia. The subsequent Tunisian campaign, an arduous and costly struggle against tenacious German and Italian resistance, including the initial American setback at Kasserine Pass, where U.S. forces gained valuable combat experience against veteran German troops, culminated in the surrender of nearly 250,000 Axis troops in May 1943. This effectively concluded the war in North Africa, secured the vitally important Mediterranean shipping lanes, and opened the strategic pathway for the Allied invasion of Europe from the south, targeting Italy, which Prime Minister Churchill famously referred to as the soft underbelly of the Axis. With North Africa now firmly secured, the Allies strategically shifted their focus to Italy, believing it would present a more manageable target than a direct invasion of France, and hoping to knock Italy out of the war while simultaneously diverting critical German resources. In July 1943, Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, commenced. This large-scale amphibious assault involving coordinated American, British, and Canadian forces was met with fierce German and Italian resistance, but the island was secured within weeks, despite heavy fighting in strategically important locations. Like Messina, the invasion had immediate and profound political ramifications within Italy. The fascist Grand Council, profoundly disillusioned with Mussolini's disastrous leadership and the rapidly deteriorating war situation, cast a vote to remove him from power. Mussolini was subsequently arrested, and a new Italian government under the leadership of Marshal Pietro Badoglio initiated secret negotiations for an armistice with the Allies. In September 1943, the Allies launched their invasion of mainland Italy, landing at Salerno and Calabria. Italy formally surrendered on September 8th, but German forces, having shrewdly anticipated this move, rapidly occupied central and northern Italy, disarming Italian troops and meticulously establishing a formidable series of defensive lines, most notably the Gustav Line, strategically positioned across the incredibly difficult mountainous terrain. The Italian campaign transformed into a prolonged, brutal, and attritional struggle, characterized by exceptionally challenging mountainous geography, tenacious German resistance, and bitter fighting in places like Anzio, where Allied forces found themselves pinned for months in a desperate beachhead, and the infamous Monte Cassino, where a series of bloody battles raged for control of a strategically vital monastery, resulting in massive casualties for both belligerents. Despite painfully slow and costly progress, the campaign successfully tied down significant German forces, including many elite divisions, which could otherwise have been deployed on the crucial eastern or western fronts, thus contributing significantly to the overall Allied grand strategy. It ultimately led to the liberation of Rome in June 1944. The burgeoning Italian resistance movement also grew significantly in strength, engaging in widespread guerrilla warfare against the German occupation further complicating Axis control and diverting additional troops. Throughout this entire period, the Battle of the Atlantic, arguably the longest continuous campaign of the war, raged fiercely and relentlessly. German U-boats, or submarines, operating in coordinated wolf packs, relentlessly hunted Allied convoys transporting vital supplies, troops, and raw materials across the Atlantic to Great Britain, which depended entirely on these imports for its very survival. The U-boat threat posed a severe and existential danger to Britain, sinking millions of tons of shipping and constantly threatening to starve the island nation into submission. However, the Allies gradually gained the decisive advantage through a combination of crucial technological advancements and brilliant tactical innovations. The development of more effective sonar and radar systems, the strategic deployment of long-range patrol aircraft to cover the previously vulnerable Atlantic Gap, where U-boats were once safe, the implementation of escort carriers to provide essential air cover for convoys, the groundbreaking deciphering of the German Enigma code by brilliant Allied cryptographers at Bletchley Park, providing invaluable ultra-intelligence on U-boat movements, and the widespread implementation of the fortified convoy system, where merchant ships traveled in large, heavily escorted groups, all contributed to decisively turning the tide. By mid-1943, Allied shipping losses dramatically diminished, and U-boat sinkings soared, effectively neutralizing the U-boat threat and securing the vital Atlantic lifeline, thereby ensuring that the immense numbers of men and vast quantities of material required for the invasion of Europe could reach Britain safely and in sufficient quantities to prepare for the decisive Western Front. As 1944 dawned, the Allied powers were firmly on the offensive across multiple fronts, meticulously preparing for the decisive blows against the beleaguered Axis powers. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany intensified dramatically, with British and American bombers launching massive raids day and night, targeting crucial German industrial centers, intricate transportation networks, vital oil refineries, and major cities. The British, operating primarily at night, engaged in area bombing to dislodge industrial workers and decimate civilian morale, while the Americans, flying predominantly by day, attempted precision bombing of specific targets vital to the U.S. German war economy, such as ball-bearing factories and aircraft plants, aiming to cripple their capacity to produce war material. The overarching goal was to paralyze Germany's war production, utterly destroy its infrastructure, and shatter the morale of its civilian population. The bombing caused immense destruction and widespread suffering, transforming once vibrant cities into vast expanses of rubble, and raising complex ethical questions about civilian casualties. But it also compelled Germany to divert significant resources, including precious fighter aircraft and anti-aircraft artillery, to homeland air defense, thereby drawing them away from other crucial fronts and critically weakening the Luftwaffe's ability to protect its ground forces. Similar devastating bombing campaigns were also unleashed against Japan later in the war, culminating in horrific firebombing raids that caused immense destruction and staggering loss of life in cities like Tokyo. The most anticipated, strategically complex and utterly crucial operation of the war in the West was Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy, France, on June 6, 1944, universally renowned as D-Day. This constituted the largest amphibious invasion in recorded history, involving hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of ships, and vast, coordinated air support. The meticulous planning, the elaborate deception operations, notably Operation Fortitude, which successfully tricked the Germans about the true landing site and timing, convincingly leading them to believe the main invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais. And the unprecedented level of coordination required between air, naval, and ground forces were truly monumental feats of military logistics and engineering. Allied forces landed on 5 designated beach sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, encountering fierce German resistance, particularly at Omaha Beach where American forces suffered heavy casualties and faced near disaster due to well-entrenched German defenders and difficult terrain, overcoming the formidable obstacles only with immense bravery and unparalleled sacrifice. Despite the immense challenges and initial bloody fighting, the Allies successfully established a crucial and expansive foothold in France, marking the definitive commencement of the long and arduous liberation of Western Europe from oppressive Nazi occupation. To sustain the colossal invasion force, artificial harbors, Mulberry harbors, were ingeniously constructed and extensive pipelines, Pluto, were laid across the English Channel, showcasing remarkable feats of engineering and logistical ingenuity, absolutely essential for supplying the vast invasion force. The ensuing fighting in Normandy proved to be brutal and protracted. The Germans, although numerically inferior and often outgunned, fought fiercely and skillfully to contain the Allied beachhead and prevent a breakout, effectively utilizing their experienced armored divisions and expertly taking advantage of the defensive terrain. The dense hedgerow country of Normandy, famously known as bocage, with its high earth banks and thick vegetation, provided excellent defensive ground for the Germans, slowing the Allied advance to a grinding pace and heavily favoring the entrenched. Defenders, however, after weeks of intense and costly fighting, the Allies achieved a decisive breakthrough with Operation Cobra, a massive American offensive spearheaded by General Patton's Third Army, which shattered the German lines and allowed Allied armored divisions to pour out into the French countryside, rapidly encircling German forces in the Falaise pocket, leading to a massive German defeat and the capture of tens of thousands of prisoners. This led to the swift and jubilant liberation of Paris in August 1944, a moment of immense symbolic importance and widespread joy throughout the Allied world, signaling the beginning of the end of Nazi control over Western Europe. As the Allies inexorably advanced eastward across France, they attempted a bold and highly ambitious airborne operation in September 1944, Operation Market Garden, with the strategic objective of capturing key bridges in the Netherlands to forge a rapid invasion route into Germany and bypass the heavily fortified Siegfried Line. However, the operation, a complex and intricately coordinated combination of large airborne landings and a powerful ground offensive, was tragically plagued by critical intelligence failures, pervasive poor coordination between ground and air forces, and unexpectedly strong German resistance, particularly around the crucial Arnhem Bridge. The British 1st Airborne Division, famously tasked with securing the bridge too far at Arnhem, was virtually annihilated in a desperate and heroic last stand against overwhelming German forces. Market Garden proved to be a costly failure, starkly demonstrating that even with overwhelming Allied superiority, victory was not guaranteed, and that the Germans, though reeling from successive defeats, were still demonstrably capable of fierce and effective resistance and cunning tactical counterblows, thereby prolonging the war and reminding the Allies of the immense challenges that still lay ahead. In December 1944, Hitler, in a desperate and final gamble to dramatically reverse the tide on the Western Front, launched his last major strategic offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, astutely capitalizing on adverse weather conditions that negated crucial Allied air superiority. German forces unleashed a massive surprise attack through the densely forested Ardennes, aiming to split the Allied lines, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a separate peace with the Western Allies, thus allowing Germany to concentrate its remaining dwindling forces on the Eastern Front. The offensive created a large salient bulge in the Allied lines, catching American forces completely off guard and leading to desperate and brutally fierce fighting, particularly in Bastogne, where American paratroopers heroically resisted against overwhelming odds, epitomizing American resilience and unwavering determination. However, American and British forces, despite initial setbacks and heavy casualties, skillfully regrouped and fought bravely. The weather eventually improved, allowing Allied air power to decimate German supply columns and exposed troop concentrations, and the offensive ultimately failed, irrevocably exhausting Germany's last strategic reserves of men and material and irrevocably paving the way for the final Allied advance into Germany itself. On the Eastern Front, 1944 was a year of relentless and devastating Soviet offensives that systematically pushed German forces back, inflicting crippling losses and, irrevocably, expelling them from Soviet territory. Operation Bagration, launched in June 1944, was a massive Soviet offensive that utterly annihilated German Army Group Center, one of the largest German formations on the Eastern Front, in a series of colossal encirclements resulting in hundreds of thousands of casualties and the loss of vast territories in Belarus. The Red Army continued its relentless westward drive, liberating Ukraine, the Baltic states, and advancing deeply into Eastern Europe, including Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary, often installing pro-Soviet communist governments and marking the crucial beginning of the Soviet Union's post-war sphere of influence. The sheer speed, immense scale, and overwhelming numerical and material superiority of the Soviet advance were astounding, significantly facilitated by the enormous influx of Lend-Lease aid from the United States and Great Britain, and a growing tactical sophistication. By the end of 1944, Soviet forces were on Germany's very borders, meticulously preparing for the final assault on the Nazi heartland, bringing the war directly to German soil and precipitating a massive refugee crisis as millions of German civilians desperately fled westward to escape the approaching Red Army. In the Pacific, the island-hopping campaign continued with brutal and relentless ferocity, as American forces drew ever closer to Japan's home islands. The battles for Tarawa in 1943, Saipan in June to July 1944, Peleliu in September-November 1944, Iwo Jima in February-March 1945, and Okinawa in April to June 1945 were characterized by fanatical Japanese resistance, deeply entrenched and elaborately constructed defensive fortifications, and horrific casualties for both sides. The Japanese frequently fought to the very last man, invariably preferring death to surrender, leading to some of the wildest and most costly fighting of the entire war, with widespread use of banzai charges and later, increasingly desperate, kamikaze attacks, where pilots deliberately crashed their explosive-laden aircraft into Allied ships, inflicting significant damage and psychological terror. These battles, though incredibly costly in terms of Allied lives, brought American forces closer to the Japanese home islands, providing vital airfields for strategic bombing campaigns and future invasion plans. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, fought off the coast of the Philippines, was the largest naval battle in history. A vast and complex engagement that effectively destroyed the remaining strength of the Imperial Japanese Navy, securing overwhelming Allied naval supremacy in the Pacific for the remainder of the war and effectively isolating Japan from its vital resource supplies. By early 1945, the war decisively entered its final, most brutal and desperate phase. The Eastern Front, the Soviet Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945, saw the Red Army smash through German lines, advancing rapidly towards Berlin, covering hundreds of kilometers in a matter of weeks. The sheer velocity of the Soviet advance caused widespread panic and a mass exodus across Germany as millions of German civilians fled westward to escape the approaching Red Army, fearing retribution for the atrocities committed by the Nazis in the East. The final assault on Berlin commenced in April 1945 with Soviet forces encircling the city. The Battle of Berlin was a desperate street-by-street, house-to-house struggle, as German soldiers hastily formed Volkssturm, People's Militia units, and fanatic Hitler Youth fought to the bitter end amidst the ruins, defending every block and building with suicidal determination. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops just blocks from his bunker, Adolf Hitler committed suicide, bringing a definitive end to his tyrannical rule and leaving Germany in utter ruins and without its deluded leader. Berlin fell on May 2nd, and on May 8, 1945, Germany formally and unconditionally surrendered to the Allies. Victory in Europe, or VE Day, was declared, unleashing widespread and joyous celebrations across all Allied nations, although the brutal war in the Pacific continued unabated. On the Western Front, Allied forces, having successfully crossed the mighty Rhine River in March 1945, advanced rapidly into Germany, encountering little organized resistance as the German army collapsed and its infrastructure crumbled under relentless bombing. As they pushed deeper into German territory, they made a horrifying and unspeakable discovery: the Nazi concentration and extermination camps. The liberation of camps like Auschwitz by the Soviets and Buchenwald, Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen by American and British troops unveiled the unspeakable horror and systematic depravity of the Holocaust. The systematic genocide perpetrated by the Nazi regime against 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, including Roma, homosexuals, disabled people, and political opponents. The emaciated survivors, the haunting piles of bodies, and the chilling testimonies from these camps shocked the world to its very core and exposed the darkest depths of Nazi depravity, forever staining humanity's conscience. Allied forces also linked up with Soviet troops on the Elbe River, symbolizing the final and complete defeat of Nazi Germany and the triumphant meeting of the two great Allied fronts, marking the definitive end of the European conflict. In the Pacific, the fighting continued with relentless ferocity. The Battle of Okinawa, fought from April to June 1945, was the last major battle of World War II and one of the bloodiest, costing over 100,000 Japanese lives and more than 12,000 American lives, with tens of thousands wounded on both sides. The Japanese defenders, deeply entrenched in caves and tunnels and employing mass kamikaze attacks against Allied shipping, inflicted heavy casualties on the invading American forces. The battle served as a chilling and terrifying preview of what a full-scale invasion of mainland Japan would entail, with military planners estimating millions of casualties on both sides, Allied and Japanese, if such an invasion were necessary, as the Japanese military meticulously prepared for a suicidal defense of their homeland. Faced with such horrific prospects, and with Japan showing no signs of surrender despite overwhelming defeat and widespread destruction of its cities by conventional bombing, Allied leaders issued the Potsdam Declaration in July 1945, calling for Japan's unconditional surrender and ominously warning of prompt and utter destruction if they refused, a veiled but clear reference to the atomic bomb, the development of which had been a closely guarded secret. Japan, however, defiantly rejected the ultimatum, with its military leadership adamantly determined to fight to the last man, preparing for a final desperate defense of the home islands, even involving civilian militias. Confronted with the prospect of a prolonged and incredibly costly invasion of the Japanese home islands, and with the successful testing of a new and devastating weapon, President Harry S. Truman made the agonizing decision to employ the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb Little Boy was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, instantly killing tens of thousands and devastating the city with unprecedented destructive power, leveling vast areas and incinerating everything in its path. 3 days later, on August 9th, the atomic bomb Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, causing similar destruction and further immense loss of life. Simultaneously, on August 9th, the Soviet Union, having declared war on Japan, launched a massive invasion of Japanese-occupied Manchuria, swiftly crushing the Kwantung Army, Japan's elite force. Faced with these overwhelming blows, the dire prospect of further atomic attacks, and the rapid Soviet invasion, Emperor Hirohito, famously overruling the objections of his military leadership, announced Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, officially marking the definitive and long-awaited end of the Second World War. Victory over Japan, or VJ Day, brought the global conflict to a decisive and much-desired close, ushering in a new and uncertain era defined by nuclear power and burgeoning Cold War tensions. The aftermath of World War II was a period of immense devastation, profound societal upheaval, and the dawn of a completely transformed global order. The human cost was truly staggering, with total casualties estimated to range from 70 to 85 million people, including tens of millions of civilians, thereby solidifying its status as the deadliest conflict in human history. Millions more individuals were displaced from their homes, orphaned, or left homeless and destitute, creating a massive refugee crisis across war-torn Europe and Asia, necessitating unprecedented international humanitarian efforts. Vast swathes of Europe and Asia lay in utter ruins, their economies shattered, and their infrastructures utterly destroyed, requiring immense reconstruction efforts and humanitarian aid on an unparalleled scale. The sheer magnitude of the suffering and loss was almost incomprehensible, leaving a deep and indelible psychological scar on generations and sparking widespread calls for a new, robust international system to prevent future catastrophes of such magnitude. In the war's immediate wake, determined and unprecedented efforts were made to hold those responsible for the horrific atrocities and the initiation of aggressive war accountable under international law. The Nuremberg trials in Germany and the Tokyo trials in Japan meticulously prosecuted key war criminals for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, thereby establishing new and crucial precedents in international law regarding both state responsibility and individual accountability for grave offenses. These trials laid the foundational groundwork for modern international criminal justice and the universal concept of human rights. The United Nations was formally established in 1945, replacing the largely ineffective League of Nations with the explicit and ambitious objective of preventing future global conflicts and promoting international cooperation, human rights, and sustainable economic development. Its Security Council, with its 5 permanent members holding veto power, reflected the newly established global balance of power and the collective desire to maintain peace through unified action, even as ideological divisions rapidly began to emerge between the victorious Allied powers. The geopolitical landscape was fundamentally and irrevocably transformed. Germany was partitioned into 4 occupation zones controlled by the victorious Allied powers: the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, ultimately leading to the creation of 2 separate states: the Democratic West Germany and the Communist East Germany, a clear and enduring symbol of the nascent ideological divide. Japan, under Allied occupation predominantly led by General Douglas MacArthur, underwent significant democratic reforms, extensive demilitarization, and rapid economic reconstruction, transforming into a pacifist democracy and a crucial economic ally of the United States in Asia. The traditional European colonial empires, weakened by the immense strains of the war and confronting burgeoning nationalist and independence movements, began their inevitable unraveling, leading to a profound and widespread wave of decolonization across Asia and Africa in the decades that followed. This reshaped the global map, giving rise to dozens of new independent nations, such as India, Indonesia, and numerous African states, often with the emerging Cold War superpowers vying for influence, thereby frequently leading to new regional conflicts and devastating proxy wars. Perhaps the most significant and profoundly enduring consequence of the Second World War was the dramatic emergence of two new and immensely powerful superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. There are deeply entrenched ideological differences, democratic capitalism versus totalitarian communism, and their competing visions for the post-war world quickly led to a period of intense geopolitical rivalry, famously known as the Cold War. This era, characterized by proxy conflicts across the globe, an unprecedented nuclear arms race, intense espionage activities, and a constant, terrifying threat of nuclear annihilation would dominate international relations and shape global events for the next 4 decades, effectively dividing the world into two opposing blocs separated by an Iron Curtain and fostering a pervasive climate of widespread fear and suspicion, leading to the formation of military alliances like NATO and the Warsaw Pact. The war also spurred unprecedented and remarkably rapid technological advancements across countless fields, yielding lasting impacts far beyond the confines of the battlefield. Jet engines revolutionized air travel. Radar became indispensable for navigation and meteorological forecasting. Ballistic missiles and advanced rocket technology laid the fundamental groundwork for future space exploration. Advanced computing, developed during critical code-breaking efforts, paved the way for the digital age, and groundbreaking antibiotics like penicillin, rapidly developed during the war, revolutionized medicine, saving countless lives. And, of course, nuclear weapons fundamentally altered the very nature of warfare and international diplomacy, introducing the chilling concept of mutually assured destruction and ushering in the atomic age. Socially, the war had a profound and enduring impact. Women played a crucial and significantly expanded role in the war effort, filling industrial jobs previously dominated by men and challenging traditional gender roles, thereby laying the groundwork for future feminist movements and greater gender equality. The traumatic experience of the war also led to a heightened global awareness of human rights, the unspeakable horrors of genocide, and the urgent necessity for robust international cooperation to prevent future atrocities and safeguard fundamental freedoms. The widespread suffering and destruction prompted a global re-evaluation of ethical principles and the profound responsibilities of nations towards their citizens and towards humanity as a whole. Veterans returned home to varying degrees of societal support, and societies grappled extensively with the psychological scars of conflict, leading to advancements in mental health awareness and public welfare programs. Economically, the war culminated in the establishment of the Bretton Woods system, creating the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and the monumental Marshall Plan, which successfully rebuilt war-ravaged Western Europe, thereby cementing the United States' economic dominance and fostering global economic integration and prosperity in the Western world. The Second World War stands as a powerful, somber, and profoundly complex reminder of humanity's immense paradoxical capacity for both immeasurable destruction and extraordinary, unwavering resilience. It imparted agonizing lessons regarding the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression, virulent racial hatred, and the catastrophic failure to confront tyranny early and decisively. Yet it also powerfully demonstrated the incredible courage, the immense self-sacrifice, and the remarkable unity of purpose that can emerge in the face of an existential threat, inspiring generations to come. The lessons learned, often at an unimaginable cost in human lives and suffering, continue to profoundly shape our understanding of peace, global security, international relations, and the ongoing tireless struggle for a better, more just, and more peaceful world. The persistent echoes of this global conflict resonate throughout history, profoundly influencing diplomacy, military strategy, and societal values, urging us to perpetually remember its countless victims, to diligently learn from its multifaceted causes, and to strive relentlessly for a future where such a catastrophic event can never again be repeated. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredibly detailed, extensive, and often challenging journey through the history of World War II. It is an endlessly vast and complex topic, and I sincerely hope that this comprehensive overview has provided you with an even deeper, more nuanced understanding of its intricate causes, its brutal course, and its profound and lasting consequences. If you persevered and made it all the way to the very end, enduring this lengthy exploration, I truly appreciate your unwavering dedication, immense patience, and genuine interest in history. Please do not forget to let me know in the comments below how your day was and what future goal you are actively working towards. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more in-depth explorations of history and other fascinating topics. Your support truly means the world to me and is absolutely vital in helping this channel continue to grow. Until next time, please take care and keep learning.